gentlemen, and welcome back to Dinozor Gaming, where we learn to be a better player. Today, we're going to be talking about piloting in Jump to Lightspeed, the set that has been out for at least a couple of weeks now, and I'm sure everybody is trying to experiment and find the deck that they want to play, especially with planetary qualifiers, sectionals, regionals right around the corner. So today, we're going to be talking about pilots. What do they do? What is their impact on the meta? And should you be playing them in your deck? So now, without further ado, let's jump right in. So basically, should you be playing pilots in your deck? Whether you're trying to make the strongest meta deck possible or just playing a casual deck, it's good to know what are the advantages and disadvantages of piloting in general. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the key aspects of piloting that I think encompass most of the pilots. So we're talking about value, aggressiveness, stickiness, reactivity, flexibility, disruption, how disruptive they are, and then of course we have the low impact ones. So we're gonna go ahead and start off with value. So what are value pilots? Value in a card game setting is essentially a card that in some way helps you get card advantage. In general, if you spend one card and get rid of two of your opponent's cards, that is what we consider value. You are now up one card. Is that good? Well, it depends what kind of deck you're playing. If you're playing a deck that wants to go really fast and kill your opponent before they can get high enough resources, value matters less. Because generally, it doesn't matter if your opponent has 2 cards in hand or 20. If they cannot play them because they don't have the resources, well, too bad. However, in decks that want to go a bit slower or very slow, value matters. So in this case, what are the pilots that have value? We're looking at Snap Wexley that says when you attach, or rather when you play as an upgrade, search the 5 cards of your deck for a resistance card, reveal it, and draw it. So essentially, it's a card that when played, replaces itself. You could basically pretend that this says when you upgrade, draw a card. Of course, there's a caveat that you need resistance cards in your deck, but there were quite a few in this set. So if you have at least 3 to 4 set of resistance cards in your deck, Snap Wexley is generally a good call. Boshek says discard 2 cards from your deck, return each of those that with an odd cost to your hand. Not going to be seen in a lot of decks. However, in the decks that you do play him, he shines. If you're playing him in the new Han Solo deck that wants to play entirely odd cost cards, this essentially reads 2 resources, give something +1/+2, draw 2 cards. That is a crazy effect, especially in a card game like Star Wars Unlimited where card draw is limited. Very, very strong card. Then, of course, we have Cassian Andor, a bit more conditional. Discard a card from on attack, discard a card from the defending player's deck. If it costs 3 or less, draw a card. That is pretty conditional. However, 2 costs for a +1/+3 is a solid body, and most decks, if you consider what 3 cost and below is, on average, a deck that's not playing hyper aggressive will play 12 turn 1 plays. That's already 12 cards that cost 2 or less. And then on top of that, they'll have at least another 10 to 15 cards that cost 3 or less. So we're talking about 25-ish cards out of a 50 card deck. Half the time this will draw you a card. It is not entirely reliable, but hey, as long as you get 1 or 2 attacks off and he replaces himself, that's pretty good value. Then of course we have Frisk, which is kind of the opposite. Maybe fits more in another category. It'll come up later. But basically, when you play as an upgrade, you can defeat an upgrade that costs 2 or less. It's a pilot that kills pilots. Pretty good. If your opponent attaches a pilot and on the next action you just put this down, well, you're now up in cards. Pretty good. Next up, we're going to take a look at what the aggressive pilots are. What is aggression in piloting and why does it matter? Well, as we mentioned earlier, pilots can be extremely aggressive because, unlike normal units, you're attaching them to a vehicle, and if that vehicle is ready, well, you basically get to attack with the stats that you just put into play this turn. It's kind of like the Millennium Falcon from set 1 that comes into play ready. That is a very strong effect. If your opponent is especially tapped out or just doesn't have a way to deal with it, most of these have a very low cost. We'll go over them really quickly. So if we look in the middle here, we have Nien Nub. Very basic, 1 cost for a 1/2. as an upgrade. Not particularly great. However, it says it gets +1/+0 for each other friendly pilot unit and upgrade. So in general, if you're playing a pilot deck, whether you're playing Poe or Wedge or something along those lines, even if you have one other upgrade, that's 1 cost for 2/2. That's pretty good stats, especially if it gets to attack the same turn it's played. Biggs is pretty similar. It's 2/1 for 1. However, depending on what you put it on, it gets a bonus effect. On a transport, this is 1 cost for a 2/2 as well. Otherwise, if it's a speeder, it can get grit. We have that new 3/7 speeder in ground that damages itself on play. Well, a lot of people are expecting space, so if you manage to put that down and put a Biggs on him, it gets really, really strong. It comes in with 4 damage, right? So if you manage to, I mean, hey, let's say Han Solo puts that down turn 1, it takes 6 damage, and the next turn you attach Biggs to it, it has 11 damage on turn 2. That's pretty crazy. Yes, of course, your opponent can definitely get rid of them, and putting a pilot in general puts you at risk of being 2-for-1, as in you attach a pilot to a unit, they use something like Power of the Dark Side or Takedown, you just lost 2 cards to 1. Of course, that's a risk, but the payoff is that it is so aggressive that if they don't have the removal, you're hitting them so hard, so fast, that it's very hard to come back. If we go to the left here, we have BB-8. Not a very strong stat line. 1 cost for 1/2, 1 played as an upgrade. You don't normally want to play this in ground because it doesn't do anything, just a 1/4. However, it says you may pay 2 if you do ready a resistance unit. Going back to what we said about Snap Wexley, you don't need a ton of resistance units, but if you have even a couple, namely some of the best resistance units are Poe Dameron, whether we're talking about the new unit, the old unit, or the new leader, being able to just pay 3 to re-ready them makes it insane. If you manage to attack twice with the set 2 Poe Dameron, that's already 12 damage, not even accounting for his effect of discarding cards to get bonus effects. Something to definitely keep in mind, especially with the new Poe leader as well, who can do eject shenanigans, have a leader that's deployed up to 4 times a game. Just something to keep in mind. It is very fast, very, very aggressive. Of course, on the right side here, we have Interceptor Ace. Generally not the best card, especially when played on ground. 3 cost for 2/3 is horrible stats. As an upgrade, it's not the worst, it's not the best. However, giving a unit grit is very strong. And honestly, from what we have seen in the early meta, this is a fantastic side deck card, especially if you're going to be playing against a lot of Boba Fett or other indirect damage decks. If you manage to attach this to one of your vehicles that you played turn 1, well, you make them feel horrible about playing any indirect damage cards, because each point of indirect that they're doing to you, you're just putting it on the unit and you're dealing it right back to them on their base. It is a very, very strong counter. It is very aggressive, very fast. However, it is a bit more conditional. It doesn't work against every deck. It's just here to keep it in mind. On the bottom, we have Anakin Skywalker. When the unit completes an attack, you can bounce this back to your hand. What makes this so aggressive is that if you are in a position where your opponent is tapped out or has claimed initiative, you get to attach this to a ship, attack, take it back, attach it to another ship, attack, take it back, rinse and repeat. Very strong effect. It's a bit costly on resources, but hey, if you just need that extra damage, why not? R2-D2, 0 cost pilot, 1/1. I mean, if we saw Metal Ceremony be used in set 1, of course that can hit more than one target, but 0 cost cards are very aggressive. They can mess with someone's math, take something out of Tarkin Town range, out of Takedown range, open fire range, depending on what deck you're playing against. And on top of that, it can trigger effects that require pilots to be attached. Of course, we have one of the new X-Wings that says when attached, create an X-Wing token. Having a 0 cost card in general in an aggressive deck is fantastic. Finally, on the villain side, we have Wingman Victor 3. Of course, there's also Wingman Victor 2. Pretty similar. I didn't want to put both here. But they're 1 cost pilots that generally give 2/2 worth of stats. They're a bit more spread out, unlike some of the heroic ones that are on the upper layer. But good aggressive options on the villainy side. Next, we're going to look at some of the sticky pilots. I think stickiness is one of the most important things in card games and TCGs in general, and Star Wars Unlimited is no different. What is stickiness? Is basically how hard is it to get rid of a card. If you have a card, like for example, Cobb Vanth from set 2, where on defeat he brings something else in, or some of the cards that we're going to look at now, your opponent generally cannot use just one card to get rid of them. That's generating card advantage for you. And not only card advantage, if they can't get rid of your units in an aggressive deck, you're just dealing a ton of damage to them. So first up, we're going to look at Chewbacca. Chewbacca says, 3-cost pilot, give +3/+3, average stats, but it says this unit can't be defeated or returned to hand by enemy card abilities. This turns off so many removal cards. This turns off anything from Power of the Dark Side to Takedown to Waylay, even stuff like Super Laser Blast. If you have this on a vehicle and they use Super Laser Blast, everything dies except for the ship that Chewbacca is on. That is extremely strong, and especially when you're playing against some of those heavy control decks like Blue Villain, well, let's say you're playing versus Iden Double Blue. Well, there's very, very few cards that they can use to deal with this. Of course, there is the new No Glory. There's other cards like Traitorous or whatever, but in general, very hard to deal with. We've all seen what happens when we have a card like Lurking TIE Phantom that requires specific removal. If your opponent didn't think of it, it can immediately lose them the game. Next, we're going to look at Luke Skywalker and L337. Very similar effects. They're just reverses of each other. Luke says 3 costs, give as a pilot +3/+2. And then when this upgrade is defeated, you can move him to the ground arena as a unit and exhaust him. And L3 is pretty much the opposite. It says as a ground unit, if it would be defeated, you may instead attach her as an upgrade to a friendly vehicle without a pilot on it. Now, what makes these guys so good is that, first of all, you're getting to use them twice. So for Luke Skywalker, you're paying 3, you're getting 3/2 as an upgrade, and then you're getting 3/2 as a ground unit. And as L3, you're paying 3, you're getting 3/3, and then another 3/3. That's crazy. We're talking about 6/4 worth of stats for 3, or 6/6 worth of stats for 3. Of course, L3 is a bit harder to pull off because you need her to die while you already have a ship, whereas Luke, you can just put it on the ship right away and not worry. Now, what makes Luke even better is that it says when this upgrade would be defeated. So whether they try to remove it with Confiscate or Disabling Fang Fighter, or just defeat your unit or bounce your unit, heck, even if they steal your unit with No Glory and then kill it, it doesn't matter. You still control the Luke upgrade. You get the unit back. It is incredible value. And if you're playing a green heroism deck, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't play Luke Skywalker unless you absolutely have no vehicles. Poe Dameron, on the other hand, is a different kind of sticky. When it comes into play, you can create an X-Wing token. If you want, you can then attach it to a vehicle. You can even attach it to the X-Wing you just created. But what makes it a bit sticky is that he comes in, generates another token, and even if they get rid of Poe, like if let's say they use Takedown or Open Fire, well, you still have a 2/2 in play. They just use the card to kill a card, but you kept part of the card. So while it's not exactly a 2-for-1, it is still a minor advantage. And there's a lot of shenanigans that you can do with Poe Dameron as well. If you're playing, for example, Energy Conversion Lab, you can use Poe Dameron, ambush it into a unit, and then after the ambush, attach it to a vehicle. And if it's a vehicle that's already ready, you get to attack again and get double the use of his stats in a turn. Pretty good. And the same goes for if you play him with some kind of effect, like let's say set 2 Han, which lets you play this for 3 but deal 2 damage to it. Well, if you immediately attach him to an X-Wing or any other vehicle, that 2 damage that you dealt to him to get him out earlier disappears. Pretty good. Now on the left here, we have the big Luke Skywalker, the red one, the leader. We're not talking about a lot of leaders in this video, but we wanted to mention Luke Skywalker leader because it is the only pilot that just says you can't defeat this upgrade. As far as I'm aware, there's only really one way to get rid of Luke Skywalker as an upgrade, and that is with Bamboozle. And that's because Bamboozle tries to send Luke back to your hand, and as a leader, he cannot be in your hand, so he gets defeated. It's a little of a tricky situation. It's unfortunate, but hey, other than that, the only way to get rid of this is with hard removal, like Rival's Fall, because most of the other removal doesn't really hit leaders. And finally, on the right side, we have our only little villainous card here, Ad Inversio, that says when you attach to a unit, give shield token to that unit. Unlike the other cards, the way this is worded is that even if as an upgrade you move it around somehow, yes, there are ways to do that, you still give a shield token to that new unit. What makes this a bit sticky is that, first of all, giving a shield token to a unit is pretty good. It makes it fairly hard to kill, other than with direct removal from like blue cards, or vigilance cards rather. But also, even if you get rid of this pilot, so if you attach Ad Inversio to a TIE fighter and then they used Fang Fighter to remove Ad Inversio, the shield still stays. It's not part of the pilot, it's part of the ship. So it makes it a bit sticky. Next up, we're going to look at reactive cards. It's a bit of a weird layout here. I'll tell you why. A lot of these happen to be in cunning. What is reactivity in this case is cards that you can use in response to something that your opponent did, to either win back the board or just punish their play or stop them from doing something that they want to do. So of course we have the Mandalorian here, that says when you play it as an upgrade, it's 2 costs for +3/+1, and you can immediately exhaust something in this arena. Pretty good, whether they just played a unit from Triple Dark Raid that's not coming in ready, they just played a Falcon on turn 2 that is ready, or heck, maybe you have the initiative and you just put this on and exhaust whatever they haven't been able to attack with yet. Very strong upgrade. And it's extremely aggressively statted as well. Then, of course, we have Han Solo. Han Solo says when you play it as an upgrade, you may attack with the attached unit. If it's a Falcon, if it's a Millennium Falcon, it deals its combat damage before the defender. Even if this is not a Millennium Falcon that you're attaching it to, being able to action cheat by playing an upgrade and attacking all at once is pretty strong. It acts kind of as a removal. And if it is a Millennium Falcon, it is even stronger. You get to attack, if we're talking about the smaller Millennium Falcons that have 3 attack, you get to do 5 damage to a unit, and then if that dies, you don't take damage back. And honestly, there's not much in the space arena that has more than 5 HP, unless we're talking about the huge capital ships or the 6-cost ships. So in general, when you're playing Han Solo on a unit, especially on the Millennium Falcon, you are taking complete control of space. Very strong. Of course, we have Boba Fett here as a 2-cost. It gives +2/+3, very good stats for 2. And then when you play it as an upgrade, deal 1 damage to a unit. What makes this so strong is that, well, first of all, ping effects are very good. And of course, if you attach it to a transport, you deal 2 damage instead. Being able to pay 2 to get 2/3 in stats and deal 2 damage to something is a game changer. If you manage to pull off this card on a transport or even on a non-transport and deal the damage to kill a unit, it puts you so far ahead on the board that even if they do 2-for-1 you later, you don't feel as bad because you 2-for-1 them while attaching. Very good. And Frisk, of course, we mentioned him earlier. It is fairly reactive. It gets rid of an upgrade that costs 2 or less, whether that's another pilot or just a basic experience token or shield token. It's a pretty good answer to a lot of things. Very good card that you can have in your main or side deck. You'll never feel bad having him. And even if you don't play him as a pilot, 3/2 for 2, pretty average stats. And now in the corner, we have the wannabe good cards. We put them here. We put them in the corner because, I mean, I guess they're reactive cards. Why not? We're going to look at Jarek Yeager and Academy Graduate. In both cases, they basically give Sentinel to a unit, and that's pretty reactive in the sense that, hey, if your opponent wanted to kill one of your units or deal damage to your base, well, you stop them with Sentinel. Of course, Academy Graduate is a bit more... a bit less conditional. It just straight up gives Sentinel with a +1/+2, whereas Jarek, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, maybe it's Yarrick, who knows, only gives the Sentinel if you control a ground unit and a space unit, but it gives 1 extra power. I don't know if those are good cards. I don't think so personally, but hey, Sentinel is a very strong keyword, so something to keep in mind. Next, we're going to look at flexibility. What? Yeah, a lot of the exact same cards. So what is flexibility for a pilot? Pilots in general are already a very flexible kind of card. They're kind of like the modal choose one cards in other card games, or pick this or that. And what makes them good sometimes is their flexibility. And while some pilots are extremely flexible, like we're going to talk, a lot of them seem to be lacking in one or the other version. A lot of the pilots that have good upgrade effects have mediocre stat lines or no effect whatsoever when played as a unit. So they lose some of their flexibility. But here we have a few examples of some that are very flexible. So if you look at the Mandalorian, like we said, when you attach it as an upgrade, you get to exhaust something in this arena. Well, if you play him in ground, for 5, he's a 5/6 that exhausts 2 ground units. Very strong. However, in that case, it would be a double cunning card, whereas as an upgrade, it's only a single cunning card. So a bit more work to get him working, but very, very strong and flexible effect. It's a card that on almost any situation you don't want to resource, because hey, no matter what your opponent's doing, you will be able to answer with Mandalorian. Han Solo, we spoke a bunch about his upgrade side. On the ground side, he can come in as a 4/5 ambush for 5. Well, we've seen another card that does that in Bosk, but that was on the villainy side, and this is on the heroism side, so it's a pretty good mirror. Of course, you lose Bosk's extra effect of dealing damage when you play an event, but I think the flexibility that you gain in being able to play this as an upgrade kind of makes up for it. I think Han Solo is an extremely strong card, and well, lucky for us, he's actually easy to obtain as well. Even though he's in Legendary, he's in OP packs, so I think he's going to be a pretty good staple in a lot of yellow heroism decks. Then, of course, Boba Fett, 5/4 shielded for 5. Pretty good stat line, and not something to be scoffed at. Shielded is a good keyword, especially on bigger bodies, especially on mid-range bodies. In most of the cunning villainy decks where you are the aggressor, putting down a 5/4 shielded when they've already used up a lot of their resources trying to like not die, very threatening. It doesn't look much on paper, but in our testing, in our experience, very, very strong and flexible card. Poe Dameron, I'm not going to go too deeply into it. I spoke about him earlier. He's very flexible, whether you're playing him as basically a pilot or a unit. One of the very few pilots that you'd rather play as a unit instead of a pilot straight up, just because of his extra effect. And of course, finally, we're going to look at Darth Vader. While his upgrade effect sounds strong, 3 costs for a 3/3 on attack, you can deal 1 damage to a unit. If it's defeated, you can deal 1 more damage to a unit or a base. Pretty strong effect, but it's so slow that it gives your opponent time to like react to it. But it's still a good card. So if you're playing a deck where you don't have a lot of pilots or upgrades and you think your opponent isn't going to be running any removal, say he didn't see any upgrades in the first game, so he took out his upgrade removal, well, this is a good way to surprise them. So that in that aspect, it's pretty good. But on his unit side, he's a 6 cost 7/7. That is a huge stat line. One of the big, I think the biggest 6 cost card we've seen. And 6 is a wonderful number for cost because it still works with Energy Conversion Lab. And being 7 attack lets you pretty much defeat almost any single leader that comes in that deploys on that turn. It lets you immediately defeat Django, Quinlan, Thrawn, so many cards. And yes, a lot of those are 5 costs, but if you're playing this with Energy Conversion Lab, you're probably ramping up. So your 6 resource cost turn is their 5 cost turn. Honestly, a very, very strong card. Once again, a card that's so flexible, you'll never feel bad having him in your hand. Next up, we're going to look at the disruptive cards. We didn't get too many of them in this set, but we have 2 notable pilots that we're going to talk about. Of course, we have the Pantoran Starship Thief. When you play him as a unit for 2, you can pay an extra 3. If you do, attach it to a fighter or transport without a pilot on it, take control of that unit. Pretty much almost every single vehicle falls under that category. There are a few that don't, but this is essentially 5 cost, steal a unit. Of course, as an upgrade, if it's removed, they take control of that back. This is almost the same thing as Traitorous, with the slight difference being that Traitorous can only hit something that costs 3 or less, whereas this can hit pretty much any cost as long as it is a fighter or a transport. So it is a little bit more, it is a little bit stronger than Traitorous specifically for vehicles. But hey, I don't know if it's good enough. Why would you run this instead of Traitorous? Is there anything that you're particularly trying to steal? There are better steal effects in the game. Maybe not in Green Villainy, but if you're playing Cunning, you have Change of Heart for 6. You have Commandeer that steals it, attacks with it, and then bounces it. It's just dangerous to play an upgrade that, when removed, gives their unit back in a set that has a lot of pilots. Most people will be running pilot removal. So something to keep in mind. But it is overall a very strong effect. And then we have Sidon Ithano. I guaranteed said that name wrong. Who cares? When you play it as a unit, you can immediately attach it to an enemy vehicle without a pilot on it and give it -2/-2. So in general, we've seen that the -2/-2 effects are costed at 3. We have Make an Opening, we have Perilous Position, we have Equalize. So being able to do that for a cost of 2, first of all, is very strong. And second of all, it is in a color that normally doesn't have access to that. And third of all, this also, even if this doesn't kill the unit that you attach it to, you take up the pilot slot. They can no longer put their pilots on it. Very, very strong versus decks that run low-cost pilots, or decks that need to put their pilots, the pilot leader, on a unit. If you put this in at the right time, they can no longer deploy the way they want to. A very strong effect. That said, of course, you can still remove this. Is it amazing? Depends on your deck. I think it's something that definitely you should keep an eye out for, something you should keep in mind. I think at the very least it is a very, very strong sideboard card to keep in mind. So yeah, you got to keep think about Sidon Ithano. Sidon, who knows? You know what? Call him whatever you want. Call him Red Man. Who cares? Of course, everything else, there are at least another dozen, if not more, pilots. We're not going to be talking about every single one of them, but a lot of the pilots that have on-attack triggers or just no triggers, basic stat lines, they still have the same good benefits as every other pilot that we discussed, but they have the risk of being too slow. If everyone's running pilots, there's going to be a lot of pilot removal. And if not, you run the risk of being 2-for-1 pretty easily. Most meta good decks will have removal for big units. And so if you just spend a card resources to attach something to a unit and then they immediately get rid of it, you're in for a sad time. You don't want that. So I think all of those other pilots are pretty low impact. That doesn't mean they're bad. And of course, this is just for premium that we're talking about. I think pilots in general, especially the ones that have on attacks, are very, very strong in limited play, whether that's sealed or draft. But for premium, you need to pick your cards very carefully. I don't think you can have slow pilots that don't have immediate impact. So finally, I'd like to think what you guys think. Are there any pilots that you think I have missed? Are there any cards that you think make some of the pilots better than I thought they would be? Or do you think pilots are just all garbage? Do you think none of them are playable? I would love to hear your thoughts. Of course, we didn't mention a lot of the pilot leaders. We did talk about them in an earlier video when we were talking about a lot of the leaders in this set. But I think pilot leaders don't fall into a lot of the same categories, especially if you're a deck that's not running a lot of pilots. Having just one pilot as a leader is not bad, especially because it gives you the flexibility to deploy in either space arena or ground arena, being able to lane dodge whenever you want. Very important. All right, and with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And like I mentioned, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. And I am always open to any feedback that you guys want to give. And on that note, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time.